Welcome everyone to the public webinar on the review of the Hydropower Sustainability Standard. We have 1 hour ahead of us, which will be structured mainly presentations from me and then a Q&A at the end of the meeting. Unfortunately, I am most likely the only voice you will hear during this hour. This is because we are in a webinar setup, which means that you can only participate through chat or the Q&A functions. Once again, this meeting will be recorded and then made publicly available for anyone who is not attending the webinar. And we're very much looking forward to this discussion. First off, I will be your host. I think I see a lot of familiar names, but for those who do not know me, my name is Alan Kalajan. I'm the co-founder and deputy executive director of the Hydropower Sustainability Alliance. My role, background, I'm an environmental and social expert with a bachelor's in environmental science and a master's in engineering. And in terms of HSA, I lead all the technical components, so reviews of the standard, our training, and a lot of our capacity building initiatives. I'm actually on the road for 4.5 weeks. I was in Tajikistan for the last 2 weeks and recently traveled to Indonesia, and I am calling in from Jakarta. So if anyone else is also calling in from Southeast Asia, we are on the same time zone, which is evening over here. In terms of today's agenda, we'll have a short welcome, then we'll go a little bit of overview of HSA and HSS. We think this is important because some of you will be kind of hearing about this program for the first time. And it's important also to set the context of, why we're doing this review and what the current baseline is that we are reviewing. Then we'll provide a little bit of the structure of the review, how you engage with it, how you submit your feedback, how we'll respond to your feedback. And then the crux of it is the topics under consultation. I'll try to explain that as, simply and clearly as possible, given that some of them are a little bit technical and a little bit more complex. But after the webinar, you also have more time to go through the resources. So this is just kind of an overview. Then we'll have a Q&A and then closing and next steps. We should not take more than 1 hour, so we'll be monitoring time quite regularly. Once again, for the new joiners, unfortunately, I'm the only voice you'll hear, or fortunately, I don't know, depends on the way you like the sound of my voice, I guess. But you have an opportunity to provide comments or questions throughout, but not orally, only written, either through the chat or Q&A channels available to you. You can put those throughout the entire session, like anytime I'm presenting, but I won't stop until the Q&A. So the questions will keep on recording, and then once we get to the Q&A, I'll just respond to all of those in a flow. Excellent. So that brings us to the first section, overview of HSA and the HSS. So the Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, organization we represent, and the Hydropower Sustainability Standard, the standard that we are reviewing. I think most of you know us, but for those who don't, we are a not-for-profit multi-stakeholder body. These are two very important components of how we operate. First, we're not-for-profit. We're really focused on the impact of our work and not generating crazy amounts of money for shareholders. And two, we're multi-stakeholder. So we don't represent one single perspective or entity. As you can see here, our entire governance structure is multi-stakeholder. So our current board, or what we call the Hydropower Sustainability Governance Committee, is made up of country governments, of financial institutions, industry players, and civil society groups. And that's a really important component of the standard as a whole. It is not the voice of industry or just of government or just of NGOs. It is the consensus view of all of that. And being the consensus view of all that is kind of difficult to achieve because industry does not have the same perspective of civil society. So together, we kind of have a common language in how we define sustainability, and that's through the Hydropower Sustainability Standard. Currently, we've certified 20 projects, and why I really like this map is because it's not just projects in developed countries in Europe or North America, it's all over the world. Actually, the first project we ever certified was an 11-megawatt hydropower project in Tajikistan. So yeah, this map is very indicative of the global footprint we have and making sure that it's a standard that is applicable across different country contexts. Here are only the certified projects. Generally speaking, 40% or 50% of the projects, a little under 50, are that we assess are certified. So we probably have a pipeline of like 50 projects that have been assessed and only 20 have been certified. The rest of them are working on action plans to then be able to meet the certification. Here are some examples of certified projects. Once again, the map is representative of the global footprint, but these are all real projects, right? Either in their preparation stage or implementation or operation. So just examples of photos of and how different they are. You have some small run-of-river projects and some of these really large reservoir projects, for example, in Canada and Brazil and Zambia as well. Then I'm not going to go through like the details of the history of hydropower, but the idea is that what we're presenting today is not to be viewed in silo, right? The history of hydropower being the oldest renewable is quite complex. So there's a lot of dark side to it, especially in the 80s with the huge environmental and social protests. That led to the sector wanting to really take sustainability seriously and developing protocols and guidances and making this a multi-stakeholder initiative. All of that work, basically since the early 2000s, culminated in the first iteration of our standard, which was launched in 2021, 5 years ago. What that standard looks like is both a standard and an assurance system. Assurance system are all the processes, like the quality control components, like how you conduct assessments, how you conduct public consultations, how you triangulate evidence, how you manage conflicts of interest. All those procedural components are in the assurance system, which is the backbone of like the credibility of our system. The technical requirements are embedded in the standard, which are translated into 5 languages you see on the screen. The technical components of our standard are then divided in 12 ESG sections, right? So these are the 12 ones ranging from, ENS assessment and management to labor to more social topics like community impacts and resettlement, more and indigenous people, more technical subjects like water quality, sedimentation, hydrological resource, and then climate change, of course. So these are the 12 sections of our standard, the current standard we have. The current standard we have also accepts all forms of hydropower, right? Small run-of-river, like the case I gave in Tajikistan, larger storage projects, like the example I provided in Canada, and multi-purpose, like some of the projects here we've assessed in Indonesia. For example, the Jatiluhur project here in the island of Java. Then our standard is also divided into 3 sections. The preparation, so that's everything to do with the design of a project, the implementation, which is the construction of a project, and then operation, which is obviously once a project is commissioned and generating electricity. The whole system is based on independence, right? So as the secretariat, we don't conduct assessments of projects. We do trainings, we help developers, but ultimately these are done independently. This is a big part of the credibility and quality control of our entire system. Here are some examples of photos from site visits, part of the independent assessments. Look, you can see people are having a great time. But yeah, all jokes aside, it's quite a serious and rigorous process involving large community interviews, project infrastructure visits, and yeah, these are just photos across the world, looking at the powerhouse, look how those are functioning as well. Then we have transparencies at the core of what we do, right? And what we mean by transparency is that every time we do an assessment, that report is made publicly available. And these are amazing examples this is a small project in Colombia, Electropalmor, where the community hand wrote the public consultation notice, sharing that and gathering feedback on the project. Here you can see the turbines and generators, again, a super small community-driven project. Just kind of again, showing you the baseline of what we have today. So what is going to be under review. And finally, how we measure our impact. So as part of the launch of the standard 5 years ago, we developed something called the theory of change. This is the impact we want to achieve and the steps we need to take to achieve it. So we've developed intervention spheres, strategies, outputs, all to create a world where hydropower projects enable healthy ecosystem, prosperous communities, resilient infrastructure, and good governance. So we report every year. So if you go to our website, you'll see our annual reports, how we're doing against these requirements. So that's a bit of an overview of the current hydropower system sustainability standard and our current system. So what is being reviewed now, and why are we doing this review today and not like last year or the year after or next year, for example? So you might have heard of an organization called ISEAL. ISEAL is kind of a standard setting body for standard setting bodies. How do you know that when we create standards or assurance systems, they meet, they're done carefully or comprehensively or done with a kind of open and transparent process? We also have to be reviewed by a standard, and that's provided by ISEAL. So the group of ISEAL members include the Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, but also very common names like Fair Trade or the Rainforest Alliance, other standard setting bodies for different sectors. Part of the requirements of being an ISEAL member is to conduct a review of the entire certification system every 5 years. Having launched the original or initial standard, what we'll call standard 1.0, in 2021, and being in 2026, we have now reached that 5-year mark, and this is why today we are reviewing the standard and the entire certification system. It's also important to do this to respond to an evolving ESG landscape. Even though sustainable development was kind of like established in the late 1970s with the Brundtland Commission, it has changed a lot over time and is still changing today, especially topics like climate change. We're learning so much as we go. So it's important that a standard, especially one in renewable energy space, needs to be updated and evolving to make sure that how we benchmark good and best practices are pertinent or relevant for the sectoral changes. So important to do that, and that's kind of the back end of why we're doing a review today. So the first public consultation is live. It was launched on the 11th of May. It is open till the 10th of July. So I think you have around like 3 more weeks or so to submit your feedback. It is 60 days, 60 days, and it's translated, all the form and resources are translated into 6 languages. So English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and Chinese. It's through a survey that is available on our website. So I'll just quickly change from the slides to the website. So this is the Alliance website, and this is the hosting page for the review. If you go to our generic website, the main page, you go to our standard, you'll see standard certified projects, HS standard review. That takes you to this page. On this page, you'll have an overview, the governance structure, the timeline, an FAQ, and the documents at your disposition. This is all provided here. They're all tabs within the same page, the review timeline, next steps, where we currently are, and then FAQ with frequently asked questions. So this is all available to you once you get out of this webinar and you're curious about submitting your feedback. So you can start the consultation form, and this is great because you can choose the language. The Alliance is now based in Portugal, so I'll just press Portuguese, and then you'll see that all the resources, bem-vindo, a primeira consulta global da revisão. Okay, I won't read the whole thing, but you can see this is increasing our accessibility, and we've already received, I think, around 20 respondents, I guess, feedback submissions, and we've covered every language except for Portuguese, actually. So I guess the hosting country of the Alliance is not doing so well in providing feedback. And here again, you can translate the page quite quickly into all the different languages. Yeah, so here is the Spanish version because I just went to the right-hand side and saw Spanish. So again, just showing you the resources available to you and the languages provided. I think I saw some Russian speaking colleagues in the call. So just to show you in Russian as well, all the resources are translated. I will now go back to the presentation. So how we're structuring the first consultation. It's 3 parts. The first is, I guess, the most technical part where we're creating changes to the HSS section titles, the principles. The principles are kind of like the core component, what that section is trying to achieve. So in many ways, it's like the definition of good and best practice. And then the scope. So what is included in each HSS section. Then we have some questions that we call cross-cutting. This could be on our governance, on accessibility, like the reports, our website, the theory of change I just showed you. And then additional feedback, which is an open-ended question asking you if we missed anything in the questions we've asked you. We're also doing two like parallel consultation tracks. So some of you are within the alliance bodies, like you're either assessors, you're in our governance structure, you might be one of our board members, or you're part of the wider council. Like you in the first slide, you remember I showed you industry, governments, financial institutions, and civil society. So those entities are getting much more information. So we're not just asking them about the three things I just showed you. We're going much more in detail about specific requirements or the details of the theory of change or certification costs or, the levels of certification, gold, silver, and platinum. Those are all topics that we're discussing within the HSA bodies, which is very multi-stakeholder and representative. To the external public, we only have two public consultations. These are open to any stakeholder. You can call up your neighbor and say, hey, do you like hydropower? Submit your feedback on this forum. Really, it's open to anybody. In this, we very much, what's the right word? Limited the consultation materials to not overwhelm the public and really just streamline what we think is the most important for you guys to provide feedback to us on. But you should know that all the internal work is what is done to develop the materials that go for the external public consultation. So what you see is not just the secretariat, our team just throwing ideas out. It's already gone through a robust internal consultation, and the outcome of that is presented in the external public consultation. So how you participate is you visit the page I just showed you. You download the reference documents in the languages that are most convenient to you. You open the form, and then you submit your feedback. We try to make it as quick or as short of a survey as possible. And we've got down, I think if you do it quickly, you can hit like 15 to 20 minutes. But yeah, you should allocate at least 30 minutes. I'm sorry we couldn't make it shorter. I know today's society, everything is quick. You have short movies, you have Instagram, This is a little bit more robust. You can't do a comprehensive review and ask people to provide feedback in 2 minutes. So apologies that it's 30 minutes. We've done our best to limit it, but, hopefully you respect that that's a sign of good due diligence. Then, in terms of the process, so there's the first public consultation is open now with the resources available to you. That closes on the 10th of July. Between the 10th of July and September, the internal entities, the Secretariat, the working groups we've created, will review that feedback and draft responses to that feedback and then get that internally approved. And that will be made publicly available on the webpage I showed you in September. Then in October, based on your feedback, we will be conducting the second public consultation, which will be 30 days. And what that will look like is a little bit different. It will actually be the full standard based on your feedback. So you'll have the new sections, the new scope, new principles, but also the new requirements into those sections and principles and scopes. And that's what internally we'll be working really hard with our different entities to take your feedback, take our existing standard and match those together. And in October, we're not really asking for you to look at every requirement in detail. Like that would be very difficult for you guys and for us to process. We're kind of asking you if there's no objection. Like, do you see anything that we completely missed, or did we get something completely wrong? Like the way we define resettlement is completely ridiculous. That's what we're really asking you in October. And then we'll finalize that second round of feedback by the end of December. Then our team from January to April will be working hard to integrate all those changes across our website, our guidances, our how-to guides, like our training modules. Yeah, it's going to be a big 4 months starting next year. And then we plan to launch it officially at the World Hydropower Congress in Sydney, Australia. So if those of you had no plans for April 2027, now you do. You're welcome to join us in the IHA team, the International Hydropower Association, at the World Hydropower Congress in Sydney, Australia. Those of you who are interested in surf, we'll have a little community of surfers that will go to the coastline between meetings or after meetings, sunrise, sunset, who knows? So it should be a good time all around. Then what we ask of you now is submit your feedback. Share internally, like you have colleagues that are interested in this. We have a lot of colleagues who work for the World Bank or IFC. They will share within their teams. And then if you're in any like professional networks, you might be in an engineering association, or you're part of IAIA, the International Association for Impact Assessments, or even if you're active on LinkedIn, yeah, please share. If you need any additional resources from us, we're happy to share those, but we're trying to get as many people involved in this review as possible. Especially, to be very transparent, we've done a stakeholder mapping of everyone involved in our program. We're quite good on industry and financial institutions. We have very good ties there. We're a little less good on civil society and government, and especially we're trying to really improve our engagement with Indigenous communities. We engage with some international associations that represents the rights of Indigenous communities, but if you have any direct access to Indigenous communities or even local grassroots initiatives that involve Indigenous communities, we would love for them to also join in this. If they're not able to access for cultural reasons, internet access, please let us know. We can find simpler ways of getting feedback. Always, we have structure, but we're also flexible. We just want to increase the outreach and, make sure that there's a strong consensus around, the outcome of this review. Excellent. So topics under consultation. Like we said, there's part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 is the more technical bit. Part 2 is general questions across the kind of more accessibility that we'll show you. And then part 3 is the open-ended question. So I'll just quickly summarize these 3 parts. So part 1 is focusing on section titles, principles, and scope. Once again, the title is the overarching kind of name of the section. The principle is what the section is trying to achieve, but it's also basically the definition of good practice and best practice. So that's a really important component to provide feedback on. And then the scope is, what does this section actually cover? There's a lot of different social and environmental sections, and with sustainability, everything is interconnected. So how do you scope them, and how do you manage overlap between the different sections? And that's why the scope statements are quite important and why they needed to be reviewed and updated. So in this first slide, what you see is just the names of the sections. You'll see that the ones in bold have gone through a name change, like the title's name has changed. So that's section 1, 3, 5, 6, 10, 11, and 12. So that means some of the sections, at least the title, has not changed in a very substantial way or not at all. So again, we're not trying to reinvent our standard. Our standard is good. We've done early stakeholder surveys involving some of you as well. And the general feedback was like, no, this is a very strong standard. I think most of the responses were between 7 and 8 out of 10, being 10 being the most positive, 0 being the least positive, which I would say generally we're like, what we've been saying internally is like, we're 80% there with the standard. So this review is really trying to tackle that additional 20%. Like, how can we improve this and help it respond to evolving trends in ESG? So what I'll do now is I'm going to summarize each one of the changes to each one of the 12 sections, slide by slide. There's more text, but the resources will be shared with everyone after. So yeah, you'll have more time to read it, but I'll try to summarize what we think is the most important components of it. Previously, the section was called Environmental and Social Assessment and Management. We've generally tried to remove the words assessment and management from section titles, because that's just like the whole standard is assessing and managing issues. The only section now that has the word management in it is section 11. And once we come to it, we'll explain why, because it's actually part of an acronym known in hydropower water infrastructure development. But for the rest, we've really tried to remove the words assessment and management, because that's kind of implied by a standard. So we thought an easier way of calling this section is just environmental and social risks and impacts. In terms of scope, it's essentially it's the same. There's no major change. We've just made things more clear. So again, 80% of our standard is pretty good. So sometimes there's just clarity. But I want to highlight one thing. In the orange section, which is the new proposed language, so you have the current above, the proposed, and then the rationale around the changes. In the proposed language, you'll see that now we've separated good and best practice in the principal statement, because we had a lot of comments from people saying, okay, we really want more clarity on what's good practice and what's best practice. So we're starting with that distinction and that clarity in the principles themselves. So again, the scope is essentially the same, cleared. But what we've done is sometimes when people talk about the mitigation hierarchy, right, to avoid, minimize, mitigate, and offset, compensate, they forget that it's a sequential process. People almost apply it as like and. It's actually then. So we've actually updated our language saying that you should first start with prioritizing avoidance. Like if you can avoid resettlement, you don't have to minimize it anymore. It's been avoided. So we've really talked about the sequential relationship of the mitigation hierarchy. So you avoid first, minimize, mitigate, and then compensate. And then for the best practice, we're trying to really think about minimizing residual negative impacts. So, when you apply the mitigation hierarchy, the last component, there's still residual impacts. That's why they're residual. They're hard to, resolve or completely compensate for. So best practice is really putting all that effort to minimize them further and then maximizing positive impacts. So how we view it in our standard, think that good practice is always like the project has to deal with the impacts that are directly associated or caused by the project. And then best practice is the idea of you're already coming to an area, right? You're bringing huge amounts of development. Can you go beyond the scope of the project and provide kind of like watershed or entire basin level support? Or can you go beyond the support for communities that are just like compensating the impacts to give them additional opportunities, like doing a needs assessment and saying, okay, man, the government hasn't provided any infrastructure for these guys in a long time. We're already coming here with a lot of investment. Increasing the budget by 20,000 is not really much to us, but huge for the communities. That type of thinking is what goes into best practice, going beyond the project impacts. Okay. Section 2, no major changes. The name stays the same. We've just clarified some of the principle, again, separating the good practice from the best practices. And then just made it very clear on like the protection and rights are met, and then referred directly to ILO, so the International Labor, what was it again? Organization? Yeah, labor organization, or the UN bodies, the fundamental conventions. And then being very clear, you'll see here, on gender-based violence and sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, so GBV and SEAH in the scope. The diversity, equity, inclusion. These were not, especially the gender-based, were not explicitly referred to in the scope, so we wanted to make sure that those are excluded, and that included, and that means they have to come up in the requirements as well. There's a pretty major change that happened in Section 3. Major, but I'll explain that as in the view of the whole standard, not so major, but just in terms of this section, it is. So historically, this section was called water quality and sediments, right? So in terms of what the scope was, it was water quality, erosion, and sedimentation. We are now calling it water quality and pollution prevention. The major drive around this, for those of you who know, is to align better with IFIs, so international financial institutions, mostly the World Bank group, so World Bank and IFC's performance standards, or the environmental social framework. So what we've done is we've scoped out erosion and sedimentation, right? So you'll say, oh my God, is this standard not addressing erosion and sedimentation anymore? Absolutely not. They're fully addressed by the standard. They've just moved to Section 11 now. And I'll get to that, why I moved to Section 11 when I come to the Section 11 slide. So note that they're still being addressed, erosion sedimentation, but they're just moved to Section 11. And now this is looking at water quality and other pollution prevention. So like hazardous waste, noise, that kind of issues associated to hydropower projects. And once again, we have the principles divided in good and best practice, and then in the scope really clearly says air quality, noise, vibration, waste management, so people know what pollution refers to. Section number 4, community impacts and infrastructure safety. The name stays the same. We have clear principles and scopes. The main difference, and I think this will probably make sense to a lot of people, though I don't want to lead people's feedback on the consultation, so ignore that statement, is we've removed economic displacement. So we used to tackle economic displacement in this section. So as you know, if anyone's worked on hydropower, you have physical displacement and economic displacement. Physical displacement, if someone's home is being taken away from them, they have to move. Economic displacement is something to do with their livelihood. Are their farmlands being affected? Or do they have a local business by the side of the road, for example? They have like a local mechanic. You have to extend the road. Boom, their livelihood is affected. That's economic displacement. We used to tackle that in this section. We are now moving that to section 5, which is covering now both economic and physical displacement. All the standards kind of group that into one. Even the way you get financing from donors groups them into one, like land acquisition and as a holistic way, just land for farms and land also for houses. So that's kind of a straightforward change and one that we've been thinking about for quite a long time, even when we implemented the first standard. So that brings us to section 5, historically called resettlement and only tackled physical displacement, now is tackling both economic and physical displacement and has been changed from resettlement to land acquisition and involuntary resettlement. Again, this is to align better with World Bank's, ESF, IFC, performance standard, and we've updated the principle and scopes accordingly. The way assessments take place in practice, it makes sense to group these because the documentation, like usually resettlement action plan, or even in Indonesia, what you call, because I'm currently in Jakarta for some project level work, they call it a LARAP, which is a land acquisition and resettlement action plan. LARAP, yeah, I think that's what it's called. So even the way the documentation evidence works, these are grouped together. So once again, we've made that change. And then in best practice, we're really thinking about significant and sustained improvements over time, right? So on the good practice, you have to both maintain and improve the livelihoods and living standards of resettled communities. And in best practice, you have to make sure that those improvements are significant and sustained over time. So good changes, I think, in the principles, especially from a social perspective. Biodiversity, section 6, used to be called biodiversity and invasive species. And we always ask ourselves, why did we highlight invasive species? That's not really the major issue when it comes to biodiversity and hydropower. So then I think holistically, we decided, okay, let's just call this section biodiversity. We'll still tackle invasive species in the scope, of course, but now it's more about biodiversity. And we've made the principle clear, right, about biodiversity being protected and conserved. And in the best practice, we're thinking about that like net gain idea. So the project will contribute to additional biodiversity conservation outcomes, not just mitigating the issues that are caused by the project, but looking beyond the scope. An example could be like a partnership with a local biological center, right, to increase their capacity of monitoring species, etc. And then we've just made the scope more clear as well. You'll see that invasive species is inside the scope statement and removed from the title because biodiversity is a more inclusive and overarching statement. Indigenous people, no major changes to the scope and title. The only change is to the principle where FPIC is in the requirements of our standard and will continue to be so. So FPIC, the free, prior, informed consent. But we've thought now, because it's part of the requirements, let's just make it part of the principle as well. So now it is very explicit and clear that the free, prior, informed consent should be achieved for any relations with Indigenous people. And then again, best practice is looking for those impacts to be significant, sustained over time. Then cultural heritage, title stays the same, scope changes. And the main change, and this is important, is that we only used to look at physical cultural heritage in this section. We are now looking at physical and intangible cultural heritage. So intangible used to be addressed in section 4, community impacts and infrastructure safety, now is moved to section 8. And what are intangible cultural heritage? Things like traditional languages, practices, customs, dancing, that kind of stuff. Governance and procurement stays the same. We just improve this language and the principles and scope. This section 10. In terms of its scope, it kind of stays the same. We used to do all these things anyway. We just made it a little bit more clear in terms of vulnerability and vulnerable groups, for example, being very explicitly mentioned in the scope. But the name is more like semantics, which means like more the nomenclature, the wording of it, which is now called stakeholder engagement and information disclosure. why I really welcome this. Okay, I'm just like the what are the directors, but I welcome this change because people always ask us about transparency, and I think having the name like information disclosure as the section title really just checks the transparency box, and already is what we do. And this section used to be called communication and consultation, but that's just grouped under stakeholder engagement anyway. So yeah, another welcome change, and hopefully something that the general audience, including yourselves, agree with. Finally, I mentioned section 11 had a major change as well. So hydrological resource used to be the name of this section. We are now calling it water resource management. This is the only section that has the word management in the section title. And why this is done is because it is an acronym. So people know WRM, water resource management. They also know IWRM, integrated water resource management. These are acronyms that are very important in water infrastructure generally. And yeah, so which means now that we don't look just at water availability, hydrological resource, we also look at erosion and sedimentation. So that's now grouped under this section. So if you think erosion sedimentation, no longer section 3, addressed under section 11. You may ask why. Maybe one clear way of explaining it is, imagine you have a reservoir, right? And you have a lot of sedimentation in this river. And slowly your reservoir is filling with sediments. This affects how you will operate your project. It affects the amount of water in your reservoir and how you have to think about optimizing your generation and removing, like providing flushing canals or flushing gates to get that sediment downstream. All of that, and that because you might have agriculture downstream or community. So it's all part of this idea of water resource management and very much linked to how hydropower company operates its hydrological resource. So again, a welcome change. And finally, climate change used to be called mitigation resilience. It will still tackle mitigation resilience. We just thought it was simpler to call this section climate change. And then we improved the principles and scope accordingly, just to make sure, yeah, they made sense with the change to the title. So that's the changes to the section titles, scopes, and principles. That's part one. Part two, we're asking you these 5 questions. How satisfied are you with the current theory of change? How satisfied are you with the current assurance system? How satisfied are you with the assessment reports and our governance structure and our website? All of these are provided on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being most satisfied. If you respond between, I think, 6 and 10, we'll just record your response. If you reply under 5, which we hope doesn't happen, but we accept, we are honest people, you will be prompted with a follow-up question asking you why. If it's good, we kind of accept it. If it's bad, basically we want to know why and how we can improve our system. I hope this doesn't now incentivize you to put under 5 so you can give us more feedback. You can do that in the last one, so no need to put 5s if you don't need to. Because the last question is basically, did we not cover something you think is very important? So any topic really, you might put it here. We might not consider it part of the review, but it'll be something that we have to think about moving forward. I don't want to plant too many seeds, but one idea is, because we've been already getting a lot of feedback, so thanks to those of you who already submitted feedback, is on decommissioning. We don't have a standard for decommissioning projects. I don't think we will develop one, but maybe that's something we should have guidance on. People think that, oh, just decommission the project, remove the project, and the ecosystem will be amazing after that. But after like 40, 50 years of operation, an ecosystem is completely different. So maybe dam removal is not the best idea, even though a lot of NGOs will push that. I think the same approach you have to take with operations, you have to take with deep commissioning. You have to do a really strong environmental impact assessment to understand if the change is a net positive. So again, if there are some topics in hydropower that in sustainability oriented that you think we're not addressing, please submit your feedback here. Okay, that brings it to the end of the slides, or at least this section of the slides, which is kind of good on timing, actually. So I'll stop sharing now, and I'll check the Q&A or the chat to see if there are any questions. Okay, one question that's been sent to me. Okay, about requirements. Yeah, so I know a lot of people probably have feedback on specific requirements. It's very difficult for us to manage a public consultation and having like hundreds and hundreds of people giving their opinions on the writing or sentence structure and specific requirements. So we've scoped that out of the public consultation. That being said, if there's a specific requirement that's really bothering you, you can take part three to mention that, and every feedback that you mentioned has to be recorded by us and addressed in some way. So you can use those platforms or the part three open-ended question to respond to that. Before this webinar, we had some questions being submitted. One was on protected areas and how we address that. So in this current, that falls under section 6, which is biodiversity. We don't have a specific statement that says, oh, you can't build hydropower in a category 1 or 2 IUCN project. That isn't there, but we do have kind of strong requirements on assessment of biodiversity and impacts on critical habitats on protected areas. If you want stronger language on that, you are always welcome to put that in the feedback. And again, every decision is made through multi-stakeholder consensus. So we have to address it. So if I was in your position and you had strong feelings about a certain topic, I would put that into the results of the survey. Because even if we can't make that change, we have to think about it and we have to discuss it with the working group that's been established and the alliance governance bodies. So funny. Patricia. I assume that name is from the Balkans or Eastern Europe. So thank you for your email, Patricia, your message. Does the updated standard aim to explicitly address protected areas, including World Heritage Sites? Are there any concrete provision of requirements proposed? It's really funny that you mentioned that because I just gave that as an example. But currently, no. But you might know that IHA, so the International Hydropower Association, in collaboration with us, the Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, developed this guide on protected areas, which did have an exclusion statement. So it did say you shouldn't build any hydropower in World Heritage Sites as the kind of no-go commitment. And then there was a duty of care commitment that should a project impact a protected area generally, probably like categories 1, 2, and 3, or even 4 of IUCN, you would have to do a strong due diligence by doing an assessment using the Hydropower Sustainability Standard. So there is this kind of no-go on World Heritage Sites, and then this duty of care using like achieving certification for the rest of protected areas. That is not currently explicit in the standard itself, but could be. Again, so I think I think you represent UNESCO, if I'm not mistaken. So if that is important to UNESCO, who was a collaborator in the guide, I would submit that as part of your feedback on the form, and then we would have to take that. And I, as kind of a environmentalist and NGO, I welcome that discussion. I think sometimes our standard has very maybe less prescriptive language, like it's, oh, an assessment has to be conducted. But in the review, we are seeing if we can make some requirements more black and white. Like if it's very difficult hydropower because, every hydropower project is different and you always have to think the net impact of a project. But we are looking to see if we can have some requirements that are more black and white. Generally, our thinking around World Heritage Sites is you have to think about why a World Heritage Site or a protected area was designated. Like why was it designated as a protected area? And what are the objectives it's trying to achieve? That's really important. Then you have to think, is building a hydropower project compatible with those objectives? Does it conflict with those objectives or is it compatible with those objectives? For example, we know a very good case study in the Democratic Republic of Congo with the Virunga National Park. They've built hydropower, I think, within the park and just at the border, which they think has brought so much positive impacts to this park because it's really decreased poaching. It's brought minimal infrastructure, which allowed management of the park much better. Also, sometimes the funding that comes with, like the revenue that comes with generating electricity becomes a fund for managing the World Heritage Site or the protected area. So there can be good relationship between hydropower and protected areas, which there's cases of, but there's also really bad ones. I'm not trying to paint a glossy picture. I'm just giving some example. I've seen projects that also are very incompatible with protected areas. So I hope that answers your question. Erosion and sedimentation are addressed in section 11. The title is quite general, and both phenomena are the result of both hydraulic and geological conditions. See more. This inclusion makes the standard less transparent in my view. Fair point. You know, there's people who really pushed and really liked the idea of water resource management as this acronym that covers a lot of the water-related issues, including sedimentation and erosion. But you're right in your feedback saying in the previous standard, sedimentation were more explicit in the section title. So if someone just quickly ran through the titles and did not understand the complexity or what resource management covers, might feel that it's less, that we're not covering it anymore. So I think that's a fair point, and one that I think I look forward to discussing as part of the feedback to the review. Personally, I'm a fan of having water resource management only because in the non-hydropower world of water infrastructure, like irrigation dams, like water supply dams, like yeah, just any water control dam generally, like managing floods, droughts, etc. Water resource management is a very mainstream acronym. So having it explicitly in our standard shows us that, especially with a lot of like multi-purpose reservoir projects, that we're not just siloed on hydropower and we're just like energy. We're really thinking about the complex nature of water resource management as a whole. But I welcome your feedback. So that's something we can think about. Another component maybe that wasn't fully addressed in this webinar is that we are digitizing our standard, which means that those of you who've been part of projects or seen our assessment reports on our website, these were all PDFs that you just press, download, etc. We are now going to move to, and the tool itself is basically a Word document with a lot of criteria and boxes that you input feedback, which then be exported as a PDF, becomes the final report. We're now moving to a digital platform. So you'll have the projects with a really nice dashboard, all the requirements that you can select, unselect. So this will both be easier for the assessors when they're conducting assessments. It will have an online database. And also from the user perspective, you can navigate information much easier than going through like a report and Command F. Like the interface will be much more user-friendly, especially we're moving to a very kind of digitized AI world these days. So I think it's a welcome change to our system as well. We'll also be integrating AI. We're moving cautiously but confidently on it. I think our standard in some ways is almost anti-fragile to the development of AI. And what I mean by that is anti-fragility is defined by a system's ability not to just resist shock, which is resilience, but actually grow from shock. So AI is going to be shocking a lot of systems, right? Like people will lose jobs, etc. But for our standard and standard setting bodies in general, it's actually positive because the more use of AI, you still want a quality control component, right? Like you can't, a lot of people still have doubts. Okay, AI has done this, but has anyone reviewed the outcome of this to have the final stamp? And that's where HSA comes in, at least for hydropower. So what we're thinking is to embed AI maybe in reviewing documentation like long EIAs, but we will never move away from the site visit component. So our assessors will always go to site, do interviews with communities, different stakeholders, take photos, and they will probably triangulate that with the evidences that's documentary that have been analyzed with AI. So I think a good way to start integrating AI and also hopefully reducing the cost of assessment because that's less person days for assessors. Yeah, so these are other things that are happening in parallel with the review. Okay, I'll just come now because we have just a few minutes left to the just closing and next steps. Again, this is you've already seen this slide, but just to reiterate, you have until the 10th of July to submit feedback. These are on the the 3 parts we just saw. We'll be processing this feedback and providing a summary online on our website done. Then we'll have the second public consultation, which is the full updated HSS2, we're calling it HSS 2.0, and the assurance system. So we're going to, update our accreditation levels, the rules for accreditation, like our assessors. We might have different levels for certification. For now, we have certified silver and gold. There's been discussions of throwing a platinum in there. Who knows? But all of that will be summarized and embedded in the updated assurance system and up for consultation in October. And then we welcome everyone to join us in Australia for the World Hydropower Congress, where we'll launch the HSS 2.0. And then please, from both, and again, you've seen this slide, but please submit your feedback. It's really useful for us. Like, we care a lot about, what we do. Some of us love hydro, some of us don't like hydro so much. I'm one of the maybe anti-dam guys, but I believe in sustainability, and I believe in the hugely important role hydropower brings to clean energy systems. There is not a single country in the world that is close to a fully clean energy system without a substantial amount of hydropower. So anybody who thinks that hydropower is not part of the question is just not realistic. That's just how systems work, unless nuclear fusion comes in. So until then, we really value your feedback, trying to make the HSS as strong as it can be to provide you as users the most benefits. So even accessibility, if there are ways we can improve the user interface of our standard to make it more useful to you, please let us know. Please share it with your colleagues. If you don't, at least submit your feedback. That's more important. And then if you want to amplify the message on social media and through your networks, that would be hugely appreciated. But more than anything, we just want to thank you for your time. It's a pleasure for all of us to be part of the Alliance. I speak on behalf of the whole Secretariat and our governance committee. I think a lot of us really enjoy what we do. I think the multi-stakeholder nature of it, in this group alone, there are people from UNESCO, the world. It's just beautiful, If only sovereign governments had this multi-stakeholder approach to making decisions through consensus. So we're quite proud of it, and we really welcome your feedback to try to make this tool and our program as useful for you guys. And I think with that, unless there are any final remarks or questions, we can come to a close. Just a few minutes before time, which allows you to go to the bathroom or have a glass of water before your next meeting. So thank you for those who have joined, and looking forward to your feedback and wishing you all a good day and evening. Take care.